Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Doomglades for a bit of Empire against Tomb King's gameplay. So of course, with the new patch, with the Tomb Kings coming out, there's been a whole bunch of new changes for all the original factions as well as the new ones. Empire has had some pretty significant changes to the flagellants. They've gone up in price a huge amount and taken some buffs to their melee attack, but honestly not enough to compensate for how much more expensive they now are. They're now at 600, and the Tattersouls are actually not 900 gold, so very, very expensive and arguably not worthwhile. Great swords have gotten a little quicker now. They've got back up to 28 speed rather than the previous 27, so that's a nice little buff. The vanilla demigriffs are a little cheaper now. And otherwise, there have been a few nerfs. The Demigriff Knights with Halberds have taken a hit to their bonus against large. But definitely, by and large, Empire has come out of this fairly similar to what it was before. And so not too much to say there. Nonetheless, here in this game, not knowing entirely what my opponent would bring, I decided to bring a composition that I thought could handle just about anything he threw at me. Obviously, most of the shooting that the Tomb Kings can bring is not armor piercing, except of course the Great Bow of Shopti, so I figured that I would bring a front line of the swordsmen as well as Sigmar's sons, just to absorb some arrow fire, backed up by 2 units of greatswords who would probably be pretty resistant to those archers. Obviously, if my opponent brought skull catapults, that could be a little bit of a problem, but he did not in this situation. And with artillery, if your opponent brings artillery, you always just got to pressure them and be very aggressive. And alongside that, I did bring an Amber Wizard for my just to cast some support spells to deal with mobs, obviously Flock of Doom, as well as Wisdom's Wild Form just for a cheap buff, and of course the usual Power Stone. Then an Empire Captain, who is now a little bit cheaper. Alongside that, no upgrades on him. He's simply there to help the infantry stiffen up the line. Behind that, we do have those 2 units of greatswords that we just discussed. In the back, we do have 2 units of spearmen, who of course can hopefully hold up the Tomb King infantry somewhat effectively if needed. And if my opponent brings cavalry, these guys can shut down the vast majority of the Tomb King's cheap cavalry. And they can also just tie down to Shopti, for example, if needed. They're not going to win, obviously, because the Shopti do have good amounts of armor and pretty powerful attacks, but they can just stall them out, which is very useful. Over here we do have the Silver Bullets as well as the Sterling's Revenge, just to give me some armor-piercing firepower to bring down enemy big monsters. So, for example, for my opponent's Shopti, for my opponent's Necrosphinxes or Hero Titans, if you decide to bring any of those things, I've got this armor-piercing fire line ready to go. They're all stocked, so if my opponent goes very heavy into archers, I can protect. These guys will be somewhat protected from any return fire. Up in the air, I do have Boris Todbringer, of course, with all of his debuffs, Crush the Weak, the Midden and Runefang, as well as the White Cloak of Ulrich, which means that against the Undead, who actually, the Tomb Kings have some very, very poor melee stats on the vast majority of their units, though obviously not on the Nagakara Warriors. So against those, Boris is actually incredibly powerful, just because with those melee attack debuffs, they become far less powerful than they usually would be, and it can really drive them down into the dirt. On the flanks, I do have a unit of Demigriff Knights with Halberds, as well as the Royal Dwarf Griffites. Obviously, Terror is not going to be very useful against the Unbreakable Tomb Kings, but it can be useful for just allowing the Royal Dwarf Griffites to stick around if they're forced to fight a terror-causing monster. And of course, the better stats are always a very nice thing. One of the important things that I would like to mention is that despite my worries or thoughts that the Demigriff Knights with Halberds might actually get outmatched by the Nehekar Knights with Halberds, I did some testing, and as far as I've been able to tell, the Necropolis Knights with Halberds are actually not capable of taking on the normal Demigriff Knights with Halberds, which is pretty cool. Empire remains dominant in the cavalry field thanks to that. So for my opponent, obviously I do apologize. This is going to be a bit of a wordy introduction, but I do just want to go over my opponent's build because this is something I'm not entirely sure about either. I don't, and I just kind of wanted to go over it. So as the Lord, my opponent did bring High Queen Khalida, based on a lot of the early access and releases made by some other YouTubers and all that stuff. It seemed pretty apparent that most of them agreed that High Queen Khalida is definitely one of the more competitive, not the most competitive lords available. She does have this cool ability. All the heroes for the Tomb Kings, as far as I'm aware, have this curse ability, which is a direct damage, it depends. Each one has a different one, but once their HP drops below 50%, they get a curse, which does some sort of different effect. In the case of High Queen Khalida, it is direct damage around her for 15 seconds, and it's based on the description, it's either comparable to Flock of Doom or Fate of Bune. I'm not entirely sure which. Now, alongside her, my opponent did bring a Necrotect. He does have a bonus against infantry, not a terrible melee combatant. Something I would say he's comparable to, say, Branch Wraith in his combat stats, though probably a little less tanky, a little more offensive, but nonetheless, definitely comparable, I think, to Branch Wraith. And he is mostly there just to boost up these these constructs that my opponent's brought, like the Ushabti. And if we look at his abilities here, I don't know these abilities either off the top of my head because Tomb Kings did just come out. But he does have Wrath of the Creator, which is a +5 melee attack and +5 armor piercing boost to nearby constructs. He does have +10 armor and +10 missile resistance to nearby constructs, which is actually very useful against Empire, which will obviously bring armor piercing shooting against you. And then Restore, which allows him to heal nearby constructs. Or, well, to cast this on a construct, and it should be a fairly decent amount of replenishment. The Tomb Kings, as far as I'm aware, the Tomb King's special ability that procs in battle does not actually affect constructs, so this is definitely very useful. And obviously with all these buffs, stacked on top of High Queen Khalida, who does have a AoE buff to melee attack and melee defense as well, my will be done. It does mean that these Ushabti are actually going to have a very, very solid absolute powerhouse sort of melee stats. Now she also does have the Venom Wave, which I forgot to mention, which is an AoE explosion that can do quite a bit of damage to nearby units. And then she does have Tomb Strike, which boosts her melee attack, weapon damage, and allows her to cause terror. She herself has actually very solid melee stats at 65, 60. Her armor is okay at 90. 4,000 HP is very nice. So obviously no regen, which is important to keep in mind. And the weapon strength of 450. Definitely one of the important things to keep in mind, though, with the Tomb Kings is that they do not have much access to regeneration or replenishment of any sort outside of the Recrutex boosts for his Ushabti, and of course their special army ability as they take losses. Now, as you can see, I'm flying over with Boris, just trying to get an eye in the sky. There are obviously some units that have stock in the Tomb Kings roster, and I did want to make sure my opponent wasn't fielding any or hiding any in the woods. And over here on the flank, my opponent does have the Necropolis Knights with halberds, who just started coming out, and that made me aware that this is most likely the majority of my opponent's army. In his front line, he does have a whole bunch of Necron warriors. These guys are decent melee attack wise. They've 32 melee attack, 21 melee defense, so not great there. Decent weapon strength at 33 and charge bonus of 15. So they're honestly not too much better than Empire Swordsmen in a straight up fight. If you compare them, you can see they have a little more HP. They're a little better. Definitely slower though. But they do get those boosts with healing waves. Obviously, my swordsmen in the front line here have actually been veteraned up a little bit, so their stats are a little better. And so, if going toe-to-toe, they should be somewhat comparable to the Necron Warriors. I'm not entirely sure who would win. Probably the Necron Warriors, but definitely the swordsmen can drag it out into a very tough fight. In the back line, my opponent does have 3 units of skeleton spears just to make sure my large can't just roll over him and get on top of his Ushabti and all that sort of stuff. Or surround Khalida. Obviously, if he needs to retreat, he can always just retreat on top of his spears and hide away from my cavalry that way. 3 units of Ushabti are really the main strike force here. Obviously, they can tear their way through enemy infantry very effectively, especially with Khalida and the Necrotech backing them up. Their baseline stats are pretty decent. They have 100 armor, which is going to be pretty irrelevant against my shooting, which is meant to shut them down, as well as the demigryphs. But against other shooting and against the front line of infantry I have, you're going to be very, very survivable. Melee attack's only 23, but they do have a +5 bonus against infantry, so they're going to be passable in that respect as well. And they, of course, do have armor piercing damage, decent charge bonus, good melee defense, so they're just going to be, and pretty good speed at 54, so they're going to be very tanky, very hard for me to bring down, and they are, as far as I'm aware, the Ushabti are rather cheap as well. Out on the flanks, my opponent does have his 2 Necropolis Knights that I brought up earlier, and these guys, as we mentioned, are weaker than the Demigryph Knights with halberds, though obviously some of it depends on the buffs used or any of that sort of stuff. And of course, they do have poison, which is a great sort of utility bonus that the Demigryph Knights do not have. The Demigryph Knights are just straight damage. They are very much a straight brawler. Now you can see I do get a nice Flock of Doom here, melting down these Necrocarn Warriors a good amount, and that is going to allow my Swordsmen and the Sigmar Sons and all those units to do very, very well against them. You can see the Greats are just plow into them and start shredding them immediately. But my opponent is very, very good about separating my front line up, and he pushes straight past my Ember Wizard with his Ushabti and goes in for my backline, going right after the Stolen's Revenge, forcing me to pull my Spearmen up just to block up these Ushabti. The Ushabti seem to have a lot of mass, and they definitely have very high mobility. I definitely underestimated their speed because I'm used to dealing with other forms of monster infantry that's oftentimes a little slower, and they just plowed straight through my front line and go right for the jugular, trying to deal with the shooting that would otherwise shred them. So I got about 1 volley in before being shut down. This forces me to pull my cavalry off the flanks, and one unit of Demigryphs is chasing after High Queen Khalida, who has breached the center here, making these swordsmen rout. And on the other flank here, you can see the Royal Dwarf Griffites are plowing into the Ushabti. The Ushabti are very bad against cavalry, despite having armor piercing and decent armor. Obviously, the armor's not going to help very much, and more importantly, their melee attack is just so bad against cavalry. Because they don't get that bonus against infantry there. You can see over here the Ushabti are getting blocked up by the Sigmar Sons. Over here, the Spearmen are tying down the Ushabti, and of course with the debuffs coming in from Boris, these Ushabti are going to have a very hard time hitting. Some of them do get into the Sterling's Revenge, but as we know, Sterling's Revenge does have immunity psychology, which makes them very tanky. Over here you can see the Great Swords just tanking like champ, absorbing the Necropolis Knights, dealing with the Neckarn Warriors. The Neckarn Warriors have over here been just tied down. You can see the Demigryph Knights in the pits here, trying to surround and deal with High Queen Khalida, who, even as I drop another Flock of Doom, just trying to nuke down my opponent's forces. forces here and really bring them to heel. Over on the right flank, things are going very much in my favor. You can see the greatswords just slicing and dicing their way through the Necron warriors. Greatswords seem to be very, very powerful against these guys. And the normal swordsmen are very much holding their own here. They're trading pretty tit for tat here. There's Captain here tying him down. The spearmen now pushing forward just to tie down my opponent's Ushapti. Meantime, my shooting contingent is kind of disengaging, and they will be able to deal with these Ushapti, who are down to about half health and getting massacred pretty badly here. You can see I'm pulling my swordsmen forward just to plug up this gap, even as the Demigryph Knights, the Royal Dwarf Griffites here, are trying to wipe out the remains of the Ushapti. And over here you can see these Demigryphs as well are trying to deal with the Necropolis Knights with halberds, and they're doing a pretty good. They're being pretty successful at that. Finally, you can see these guys do crumble, and the Ushapti do just fall apart here. But you can see my opponent is getting some of those healing waves. You can see he's just getting a whole bunch of replenishment here on his HP. My greatswords over here just finally starting to fall apart. They're on 72 models right now. They're surrounded by 2 units of Necron warriors as well as Necropolis Knights, which is poisoning them. So definitely not in the best of situations, and there's not much I can do to bail them out. So they're just doing a courageous last stand here, holding their ground as best they can. You can see Boris, of course, with those debuffs jumping around and causing some major mayhem. Obviously, the Demigryph Knights with halberds will be able to shred the Necropolis Knights pretty effectively. And with Boris' support, these guys really don't stand much of a chance. And of course, the lower stats on the Vampire Council units are definitely being crippled here by Boris Todbringer. And of course, there are some buffs that you can get with, for example, Lord of Nahakara, but these are simply not. You can see the halberd Necropolis Knights, they're just falling apart. But the Lord of Nahakara doesn't really have the best of melee stat buffs. It does have damage buffs, but the attack buffs I do believe are somewhat more limited. Unlike, for example, Van Hels's Danse Macabre on the Vampire Counts. Where you can see High Queen Khalida diving into the silver bullets, causing some major mayhem, causing me some major agony. And you can see my Amber Wizard is coming back, but my opponent is now getting one of those summons. He's got his Ushapti because he's just taken so many losses at this point. Over here, the Demigryph Knights with halberds fighting tooth and nail to hold back the Necron warriors as well as the Necropolis Knights, who they finally drag into the gutter. And over here, Spears and Swords actually doing a very good job just holding down the fort against these spearmen. Over here on the other flank, you can see the Royal Dwarf Griffites are plowing through the Necron warriors, crushing the skeleton spearmen, and of course with the help of Boris here to debuff the enemy leadership, they're doing very well. But my opponent does have High Queen Khalida chasing after my poor silver bullets. Now High Queen Khalida does have pretty good stats, but she is large. She does not have the best survivability. She doesn't have the best HP pool, and if it wants dove upon, you can see she does pop her ability. They're just trying to drain down my HP a bit. But once she's being chased by Boris, by the Demigryph Knights, she's definitely a very, very squishy, very susceptible lord. She's going to get shredded very, very quickly there. Over here you can see the Sterling's Revenge disengaging to trying to deal with the Ushapti. Once High Queen Khalida goes, my opponent's army is really going to start crumbling. You can see she does get one more Venom wave off before getting killed by Boris, the man himself. You can see Boris, of course, has actually been tanking out very well this game. He's only had to reach in about 500 HP, so definitely been holding out strong. And now against the Ushapti, it's really just a matter of time. And my army is just collapsing on them at this point. You can see the Greatswords did a great job. The Swordsmen actually did surprisingly well, as did the Spears and Sigmar's Sons. If my opponent had, for example, brought Tomb Guard, they might have performed a little better against the Swordsmen. Though actually Tomb Guard does not have a bonus against infantry. So their ability to shut down Swordsmen is somewhat, and lower-end Empire infantry is somewhat limited. Because their stats are just not that good. I definitely think this is a decent, if not amazing, composition against Tomb Kings, at least as far as right now I'm aware. I was just trying to build a composition that I thought would work no matter what my opponent brought. Definitely Tomb Kings have some issues. I think Tomb Kings are going to struggle against high-end, heavily armored anti-large infantry. I think that's going to be a huge issue for them, because they simply don't have the tools to break them cost efficiently, besides perhaps the Ushapti warriors with great bows. As you can see, the swordsmen traded fairly effectively, except the one unit of swordsmen that just got breached immediately by Khalida and the Tomb Guard. Sigmar's Sons did an okay job. It's important to keep in mind just what the sorts of units they were often fighting. And if you compare the kill counts on the swordsmen and the spears to the Necron warriors, you can see they traded fairly effectively at while being much cheaper. Of course, the shooting units did not get that many kills. But they were focusing to Ushapti for the vast majority of the game. Similarly, the Demigryphs didn't rake in the most amount of kills, but once again, they were focusing on the Necropolis Knights. Getting those great Flocks of Doom from the Amber Sword, I think, was really useful, as was the Empire Captain just kind of anchoring the line there while Boris was flying around, causing a mayhem in the back line. Definitely, I think the Tomb Kings have some issues with their units having generally poor stats. Not true for all of their units, of course, but much like Vampire Counts, the units are not, I don't think, quite cost-effective. They obviously have, all of them have fear, and all of them are unbreakable effectively, just disintegrating over time. So that's definitely a huge benefit, but unlike the Vampire Counts, I don't think they've got quite the same amount of boosts. Instead, they do have much tankier special or this much tankier monsters infantry and monsters units. Definitely the Headquarter Knights are still very solid, though I don't. Upon learning that they're not, they don't have the highest model count. They only have an 18-man model count, so they're definitely not. They're not able to go tit for tat with Demigryph Knights with halberds. And though I haven't done the testing yet, I do suspect that they might actually not be able to go tit for tat with some of the other anti-large infantry or anti-large cavalry, simply because they don't. The Necropolis Knights don't really have the greatest armor. They only have a 90 armor. So against a lot of the cavalry, like Blood Knights or units like that, they'll probably get smushed, I'd assume, pretty badly as well. So yeah, definitely, I thought it was fun. Definitely getting to go up against the Tomb Kings. Great game, great game to get bread and chicken. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I do hope you found it fun just to see Tomb Kings in action. I will probably be posting up a set of videos as we continue throughout the day and as I get more and more gameplay in, and probably going to be doing a little bit of campaign gameplay. I'm not sure if I'll be posting that up for videos, but I'll definitely be trying them out for campaign. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions like that about the game or about Tomb Kings or about the changes, the patch notes that I might not have answered previously or that you might still be wondering about, be sure to post them down in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.